6 minutes past 8 GMT. Welcome to Weekend from the BBC World Service with me, Julian Warwick. Well, Paul McNally is the founder of Develop AI. That's an AI training, production and consultancy business based in Cape Town, South Africa, and joins us live. Paul, welcome to the programme. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Julian. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How do you explain some of those, in quotes, glitches, unquote?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because both these companies have sort of come back with the sort of generic, it was a technical problem, you know? And I think what you were talking about in terms of Gemini, Google's image creation service, I think it's correct in that it is what they've said is an overcorrection. But I would like to say that I was in Ethiopia last year and we were doing tests with Ethiopian journalists, and they were shocked with, and they didn't actually have access to ChatGPT at the time. And they were shocked with how the image generation was always creating images where if you asked for a classroom, there would be a white teacher that was teaching Black Africans, no matter what you asked. Now they've overcompensated. But I mean, the scary part is that these models didn't shut down and stop their image generation when they were biased in the other direction. So as soon as they've become biased against white people, now now it's an international story, which is kind of scary.
But those biases, I mean, I'm probably going to ask a very naive question here because I'm conscious of the fact that this is complicated territory. But clearly those biases can only arise because of what is fed into the system in the first place by human beings.
Yeah, I mean these models are scraping the internet, right? They're scraping our articles, they're scraping everything that we put into them. And it's interesting that maybe what we should be looking at is that when we are asking things like ChatGPT certain questions, really what it's giving back to us is a mirror of where our bias is sitting. People are talking about media biases constantly in these models. And I think maybe a sort of another way to twist it is to be like, let's have a look at what media thinks of this at the moment. And then we can see the bias almost in like a paragraph form, which if you look at it that way is kind of exciting.
Misha Glennie, you and I were having a conversation about the microchip earlier, so I sensed you might want to contribute to this conversation. By all means, come in.
Yeah, well, the first thing to say is that artificial intelligence, ChatGPT and so on, based on the LLMs, large language models, they are not tellers of truth. They are tellers of stories. This is the most important thing to remember when you're using ChatGPT and why it can come out with things which are apparently outlandish when you imagine it to give a straight answer to a straight question. But the other issue about artificial intelligence is that these technologies are now accelerating at such a rate that we can no longer properly comprehend, either individually or as humanity collectively, what is exactly going on here and what they are directing us to do, how they're influencing us, and how they might function in the future, particularly when it comes to things like the use of artificial intelligence in the military. I started my Rise of the Microchip program talking about the case of Stanislav Petrov, a Soviet soldier who in 1983 was told on his command post that the Americans had launched 6 nuclear missiles against Russia by 30 computers. And he had to make a decision to stand down the Soviet military response, which would have been nuclear missiles to the United States. Now, if artificial intelligence had been in control that day and not a human being, it could well have been that they would have released those missiles. So there are real dangers here that we have to be aware of.
Paul, would you echo that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be difficult how we move forward. We're kind of on the face front, we're thinking about how it generates responses and images. But you're right, like that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? These models are being used in all manner of human endeavors that we're not like privy to.
But it's this sense that we've set something in motion, but we can't keep up with it anymore.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing, right, is it's becoming a publishing issue. So, heads of Google have to now go on record and talk about how these models are producing certain images, but they weren't part of that publishing process. It's not like a traditional sense of they chose to create that image and they're putting it out and now they're apologizing for it. They're not aware of it, and they've kind of let this out of the bottle now. And it's going to be interesting how they curb that, because now they're going to have to answer for every inconsistency, every mistake, every bias. And I don't really think that that's something that a company like Google or a company like OpenAI really wants to get involved in. And maybe they haven't really anticipated what they're going to have to face.
Arisia, a brief one, if you would.
I think this AI technology comes at the time when the world is really at a dangerous place. And I think, competition versus democracies and autocracies, and to which use they will put this technology is key. We should be able as a humanity try to regulate it commonly, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So, civilian versus military and the different set of values that underpins societies will be reflected in AI and how it will be used for or against humanity.
Paul, a last one, if I may, and I apologise to ask you this question when we've got about a minute of the programme left, but Demis Hassabis says he believes Google is 6 to 10 years away from general intelligence. What's he mean?
Well, I think, Google for decades have really wanted this sense of like almost the Star Trek computer, right? They want to be able to ask it anything. And I think that we're going to have to decide if, as an audience, as consumers, if we want to go along with that. Because I think, you mentioned sort of disinformation. We're going to have such an explosion of that even this year with all the elections going on. And I think people are going to have to decide if they even want to engage with this. And if we don't, then these companies are going to have a problem with keeping us interested, right? Because if things become so complicated, if they become that we don't trust anything that we see, then and I hate to say this, but the more wealthy part of these populations are going to be able to disengage with that. And where will that leave people that can't?
Thank you very much for being both so clear and so brief in answering that question, which was probably rather unfair on my part. Paul McNally, founder of Develop AI in Cape Town, South Africa, which takes our conversations to a close. Misha, thank you so much for your company over the last 2.5 hours. And Arisia, thank you very much for yours.
Good to be with you.
Thank you for listening to Weekend. The programme back next Saturday. Here on the BBC World Service, the latest news headlines are next.